Welcome back to Anime Realm. This is my recap for the anime The Daily Life of a Middle-Aged Online. If you enjoy my recaps, please think about subscribing.
Kenichi is a middle-aged, unattractive loser sent to another world with only a cheat skill that grants access to an online shopping site. This story starts with Kenichi, a man who works himself to exhaustion, eventually landing in the hospital. Realizing the toll on his health, he decides to leave his hectic life behind and adopts a simpler, tranquil existence in the wilderness. There he spends his days tending to crops, playing with crows, and unwinding by watching isekai anime while writing in his free time. One day, as he tries to order ingredients online, Kenichi is suddenly transported to a strange and unfamiliar place. Noticing a corpse nearby, he begins to wonder if he somehow ended up in a fantasy world. Drawing inspiration from the isekai anime he's seen, he decides to try summoning a status screen. To his astonishment, it actually works. The screen confirms he's in another world, but something feels off. Unlike the status screens he's used to seeing in shows, it doesn't display health or magic points, nor does it list any skills. Instead, it shows only two options, one called Shangri-La, so Kenichi gets curious and clicks on it and is surprised to find that it's the very same online shopping site he often used in his old world. Then the other feature available is an item box. Testing it out, Kenichi stores some nearby weeds and finds that retrieving them is just as easy. Just then, Kenichi's stomach growls loudly, reminding him of his hunger, so he decides to try ordering food from Shangri-La, but unfortunately the screen prompts him to insert money, and Kenichi has none. Thinking quickly, he comes up with an idea. He tests whether he can trade items stored in his item box for cash. Sadly, the weeds he picked earlier have no value, leaving him frustrated and empty-handed. Growing desperate, Kenichi's eyes land on the sword sticking out of the nearby corpse. Though hesitant, he decides to trade it in, and to his relief the sword fetches nearly 100,000 yen, finally giving him the funds he needs to buy food. Kenichi then takes a moment to bury the corpse and thanks it sincerely for helping him survive in this strange new world. Afterward, Kenichi uses Shangri-La to purchase a bike, sturdy boots, and a compass to help him navigate. The compass guides him as he searches for a settlement to earn some money. While taking a break, Kenichi prepares a meal using the supplies he ordered and has a revelation. He can use Shangri-La to order goods and then sell them in this world for a profit, so it's the perfect plan to build his fortune. Kenichi enjoys his meal, but his peace is shattered when terrifying monsters emerge from the forest. He gets panicked and scrambles to find a weapon on Shangri-La, and the only option is a bow, but he doesn't know how to use one. He gets desperate and opts for fireworks instead, using them to scare the beasts and buy some time. When the fireworks only provide a brief reprieve, Kenichi quickly orders a slingshot. And to his amazement, it works perfectly, allowing him to fend off the monsters, and he emboldenedly keeps attacking until the wolves retreat. With his heart pounding, Kenichi grabs his gear and flees, using a headlamp he purchased to guide him safely through the dark. By the next morning, Kenichi is relieved to see a city in the distance. On his way, he encounters a merchant named Fuyu, who offers him a ride to the city. Kenichi accepts and introduces himself to another passenger. He explains his plan to do business in the city, but Fuyu is puzzled by his lack of equipment. But then Fuyu guesses that he must be one of those special people with an item box. The other passenger, eager to demonstrate, pulls an instrument from her own item box and begins singing a song about their journey, declaring that Kenichi's story is just beginning. Once in the city, Kenichi thanks Fuyu for the ride by gifting him some pepper. Fuyu is amazed but visibly uneasy, questioning if Kenichi plans to sell spices in the city. He warns Kenichi about Bacopa, a powerful spice syndicate that holds a monopoly on the market, so dealing in spices could attract dangerous attention. Fuyu then loosens up and offers to pay for the pepper, but Kenichi insists it's a gift. But Fuyu, being a proud merchant, insists on paying, making it Kenichi's first sale. Then after Fuyu departs, Kenichi does some quick calculations and is stunned to discover just how much pepper is worth. That evening, Kenichi arrives at a restaurant that doubles as an inn, where the receptionist warmly greets him. He decides to stay the night and pays 1 silver for a room. When the girl asks him to sign his name, Kenichi realizes he doesn't know how to write in this world's language. Embarrassed, he explains that it's not because he's uneducated, but simply unfamiliar with the local script. The receptionist finds his strange attire curious, and Kenichi jokes that it's all part of his business strategy. However, she warns him that the Merchants Guild won't register anyone who can't read, write, or perform basic calculations. To prove he isn't an idiot, Kenichi takes a quick math test and impresses her by solving everything with ease. Reading and writing are still hurdles though, so she offers to teach him how to write his name. The girl then introduces herself as Azalea, and Kenichi strikes a deal. If she teaches him the language, he'll reward her with candy from another country, and Azalea intriguingly agrees. Then when Azalea tastes the candy, she's blown away by its exquisite flavor, feeling like a noble indulging in a rare treat, so she worries that the upper class might confiscate it if they find out. Kenichi, though amused by her reaction, nudges her to begin the lesson. Then as they go over the basics, Kenichi realizes the language shares similarities with the one from his old world. Thanks to Azalea's guidance, he makes quick progress. Impressed by Kenichi's rapid learning, Azalea predicts he'll become a successful merchant, so jokingly says that she might even want to be his mistress someday. But Kenichi reminds her that he's much older than she is and suggests she abandon the thought. But he unintentionally makes things worse by sketching a portrait of her. Azalea, awestruck by the drawing, feels even more special, and between the candy and the portrait, she feels deeply indebted to Kenichi and resolves to repay his Dan kindness. The next morning, Kenichi visits the Merchants Guild to complete his registration. Though the fee is 1 silver, his wallet is running low, leaving him with just 116,000 yen after expenses. Fortunately, the guild allows him to pay in installments, and he receives his official guild ID. Outside, Kenichi wanders through the bustling market, carefully studying the prices of various goods. He notes that a plain plate sells for a small square silver, roughly equivalent to 5,000 yen, while 2 sheets of slightly brown paper cost 1 copper, or about 1,000 yen. As he takes stock of knives and other items, he decides to buy a mixed bag of fruit from a quirky fruit seller with a weird marketing style. The fruit is unfamiliar to Kenichi, and though his item box displays their names, he's still clueless about what they are. Thankfully, Azalea recognizes the fruit and tells him she loves them. Back in his room, Kenichi tries to brainstorm his next steps, but ends up passing out from exhaustion. The next day, Kenichi uses supplies he purchased, including a hammer, to construct a stand for his business. Azalea marvels at the innovative clothespins he uses, remarking how much better they are compared to the flimsy ones she's accustomed to. Her excitement surprises Kenichi, who hadn't realized such a simple item could have value. Later, Kenichi unintentionally shocks an old woman by summoning his stand right next to hers. After setting up, she becomes his first customer, purchasing 5 clothespins for 1 copper, and introduces herself as Anama and warmly welcomes him to the area. As hours pass, Kenichi's clothespins sell quickly, much to Anama's delight. Her own sales see a boost simply by being near him, and she expresses hope that he'll stay in the area. Kenichi is thrilled by the success of his pins, but as a savvy businessman, recognizes that imitators are bound to emerge and compete with him. Just then, a young man approaches Kenichi's stand, and it's immediately clear he's someone of high status. The man inspects one of Kenichi's knives, intrigued by its pristine condition. Kenichi demonstrates its sharpness, easily slicing through various materials. The knife's price of 2 silver is steep, but the man is impressed and interested. However, he finds the blade a bit too small and asks if Kenichi has anything larger. Kenichi then searches his item shop for something suitable, knowing that certain restrictions make it tricky to find larger weapons, and eventually he discovers a sword, and the young man is captivated by its craftsmanship and beauty. However, the sword carries a hefty price tag of 1 gold coin. While the man wrestles with his desire to purchase it, Kenichi wonders if he asked for too much. Still recognizing the man as a big spender, Kenichi remains confident that his business instincts will pay off. Just then, a small cat person starts sniffing around Kenichi's stand, earning scolding remarks from other catfolk for going overboard. This is Kenichi's first encounter with beast folk, and he can't help but stare in surprise. Realizing his reaction might seem rude, he quickly apologizes. One of the cats, seemingly ignoring the awkwardness, jumps onto Kenichi's stand and points at the roof, asking to buy it. Kenichi initially declines, but then he remembers he can always order more from Shangri-La. The cat person decides to buy 3 of them, and Kenichi, sensing an opportunity, offers a small discount, shaving off 1 copper from the total. However, the cats reveal they don't have copper coins and seem entirely unfamiliar with basic math. Kenichi steps in and calculates the total for them, showing off his numerical skills. Though initially skeptical, the cats are convinced when the blonde man from earlier vouches for Kenichi's accuracy. With the deal finalized, the blonde man also announces he's ready to buy the sword. That evening, Kenichi uses his earnings to pay for 5 full nights at the inn. Meanwhile, in a lavish estate, a noblewoman marvels at the clothespins her maid purchased. So she gets inspired and decides she wants to sell them through her company, and immediately seeks out her father to capitalize on the opportunity. Back with Kenichi, he prepares for a bath using a small tub he recently purchased. Browsing Shangri-La, he discovers drum baths and considers the idea of filling one with water and heating it over a fire for a relaxing soak. As he reflects on all the buying he's been doing, a thought strikes him. How does the online shop actually work? The light from the screen doesn't illuminate his surroundings, and he has no idea how the packages are delivered. So a creeping suspicion gnaws at him that the shop might eventually demand some kind of supernatural payment, perhaps even his soul. Unable to make sense of it all, Kenichi decides to give up worrying. Elsewhere, a disheveled girl wrestles a pigeon to the ground, hoping to secure her next meal, but suddenly a voice calls out to her, startling the girl, so she panics and starts running while silently pleading with God not to be discovered. The next day, Kenichi starts setting up his shop and decides to update his inventory. He adds some jewelry to the display, not valuable gemstones, but polished glass pieces that look attractive enough to turn a profit. While he's arranging everything, Margaret the maid from the previous day arrives, saying she's here to buy more cloth spins. Kenichi asks how many she needs and is stunned when she requests 100, but when he sees that she has the money ready, he finalizes the sale without question. As Kenichi packs up the pins, Margaret notices the jewelry and asks if the jewels are made from real diamonds. Kenichi explains that they're just polished glass, but their aesthetic appeal makes them popular. Margaret admires the craftsmanship and asks him to set one aside for her, promising to come back and purchase it later. Business continues smoothly for most of the day, but just as Kenichi prepares to close up, the beast folk from the previous day return. Their serious expressions put him on edge, and he worries they might be here to cause trouble. But before he can say anything, the cat girl Miley gets right up in his face and sniffs. She confidently announces to the others that she smells spices on him. The beast folk erupt in cheers, pleading with Kenichi to sell them some. Kenichi is immediately hesitant, and remembering the warnings about the spice syndicate, he knows that selling spices could bring serious consequences. He has no idea how the syndicate operates or what they might do to him if they find out, so he refuses to take the risk. The beast folk persist, but the locals chime in, telling them it's unfair to pressure a newcomer like Kenichi into endangering his livelihood. Eventually, the beast folk relent, understanding his position. However, Kenichi comes up with a compromise. While selling them spices directly is too dangerous, sharing a meal with them isn't against any rules, so he invites the group to join him for dinner, suggesting they meet in the woods outside town to avoid attracting unwanted attention. Overjoyed, the beast folk eagerly agree, and later that evening, they meet Kenichi and Inama at the outskirts of town, ready to cook together and enjoy a hearty meal under the stars. Kenichi prepares to start cooking when Inama asks if she can help. He hands her some vegetables to chop, but as soon as she looks at them, she's amazed at how vibrant and juicy they are. Kenichi explains that he sourced them from a foreign country and guarantees their flavor is as good as their appearance. While the two of them work on the veggies, Miley and the other beast folk are busy by the river, successfully catching a decent haul of fish to add to the meal. Once the ingredients are ready, Kenichi begins prepping the fish, seasoning it with his carefully selected spices. He tosses everything into a pot to cook, eventually creating a dish that leaves the beast folk stunned. They've never tasted anything like it before and are deeply grateful for the meal. However, the delicious food makes them crave alcohol. Inama tries to talk them out of it, pointing out that alcohol is expensive. But Kenichi sees no harm in indulging them a little, so he pulls out a bottle of cheap booze, pours them each a small glass, and makes them promise never to tell anyone about the meal he cooked for them. Inama warns Kenichi that he might be too generous, but he insists that there's no harm in letting them enjoy themselves, especially since they seem like good people. The night becomes lively as they drink together, laugh, and even bathe in the nearby river, but eventually everyone falls asleep under the stars. Miley, who has grown quite fond of Kenichi, decides to sneak into his bedroll to look for more special spices. The next morning, Kenichi returns to the inn, where Azalea is visibly upset. She scolds him for being out all night, clearly suspicious of his activities. Kenichi tries to explain that he was just hanging out with some beast folk outside of town. However, when Azalea spots Cat Lady fur clinging to his jacket, her suspicions grow. She accuses him of doing far more than hanging out and is furious that he chose to spend his time with a cat girl over her. Later that day, we see that when Kenichi sets up his shop for another day of business, Margaret arrives, but this time accompanied by Primula. At first, Kenichi is momentarily distracted by Primula's striking beauty, but when he spots Margaret standing behind her, he remembers they must be here to buy the necklace Margaret inquired about the day before. He retrieves it, and Margaret pays for it before handing it to Primula, who examines it closely. Primula is amazed by the necklace's craftsmanship, finding it hard to believe it isn't made from real diamonds, so she gets intrigued and asks if Kenichi has more of these in stock. Kenichi retrieves additional pieces from his inventory and lays them out for her to examine. Primula is impressed not only by the quality of his products, but also by the fact that he has an item box, a rarity that adds to his intrigue. She then introduces herself as the daughter of the owner of the Mallow Trading Company and expresses a desire to introduce Kenichi to her father, believing he would be interested in working with him. While Kenichi is intrigued by the opportunity to meet the head of a major trading company, he's hesitant to get involved with influential figures because he fears it could lead to complications. However, Anama reassures him, explaining that Primula's father is highly respected in town and known for his good character. Feeling more at ease, Kenichi agrees to go with Primula, and she invites him to join her in her carriage. As they travel, Primula shows Kenichi some clothespin replicas her craftsman attempted to create. While the wooden shape was easy enough to copy, the metal spring proved too complex to reproduce. Kenichi understands their difficulty, as even he doesn't know exactly how the springs are made, only that the process involves a high level of intricacy. Eventually, they arrive at Primula's home, and Kenichi is awestruck by the size of the estate. However, Primula downplays it, explaining that while it might seem impressive, it's modest compared to the mansions owned by the local nobility. Kenichi and Primula then enter the mansion and are greeted by her father Mallow, a composed and charismatic man. After exchanging pleasantries, Mallow invites Kenichi to sit so they can discuss business, and once Kenichi is settled, he shows Mallow some of the jewelry he has in stock, and like Primula, Mallow is impressed by the craftsmanship. Primula also mentions Kenichi's item box, which intrigues Mallow. He reveals that he owns an item box as well, crediting it as one of the key tools that allowed him to build his trading company to its current success. Mallow points out that if Kenichi uses his item box wisely, he could achieve great things too, though it seems Kenichi is currently only using it for storing supplies. Mallow then gets to the point. He wants to discuss the possibility of Kenichi becoming the official supplier for the Mallow Trading Company. Kenichi, having anticipated a proposal like this, assumes Mallow intends to market his products for maximum profit. However, Kenichi questions why Mallow didn't simply buy items from his store at a low price and resell them for a higher margin. Mallow admits he could have done that, but he considers such tactics underhanded. If Kenichi ever discovered his goods were being resold without permission, it could damage their relationship. Additionally, by negotiating directly, Mallow gains a competitive edge over other traders who might approach Kenichi in the future. Satisfied with Mallow's reasoning, Kenichi listens as Mallow offers him 50% of the retail price for his goods. While Kenichi could push for a higher percentage, he's content with the offer, considering he's already earning significant profits through his online store. He agrees to the deal, and the two shake hands to seal the agreement. After signing the supply contract, Kenichi delivers his first batch of items, earning over $1,000,000 worth of coins in the process. As they discuss future plans, Primula spots the beautiful jewels in Kenichi's stock and immediately falls in love with them. She asks Mallow for permission to purchase them for herself, and Mallow sees no issue with it. Primula offers Kenichi 10 gold coins, equivalent to 2,000,000 yen, for the jewels, and this transaction gives Kenichi his first ever 8-figure bank balance since arriving in this world. Encouraged by his newfound financial success, Kenichi decides to start building the peaceful life he's dreamed of by purchasing a home from his online store. The next day, Kenichi leaves the city walls and ventures into the forest to search for the perfect spot to set up his new home. But before heading out, he explains his plan to Azalea so she won't worry, but she finds it odd that he willingly chooses to live in the dangerous forest instead of the safety of the city. But Kenichi reassures her that he won't be too far from the city walls, and she thinks he is really an odd one. After some exploration, he finds a suitable location and begins clearing the area by purchasing a weed whacker from his store. However, he quickly runs into a common issue: fuel costs. While most items in his store are surprisingly affordable, fuel is just as expensive here as it was in his previous world. Resigned to the cost, Kenichi pays for the fuel and continues working until he successfully clears a path in and out of the forest. Next, he turns his attention to the trees. To tackle them, Kenichi buys a chainsaw and starts cutting them down one by one. After several grueling hours of work, he manages to fell a significant number of trees, but when he tries to store the logs in his item box, he encounters another problem. The trees are too long to fit. Frustrated but determined, Kenichi brings out the chainsaw again and cuts the logs into shorter 10-meter pieces that fit neatly into his item box. With most of the tree removal complete, all that's left are the stumps. However, with the sun already setting, Kenichi decides to call it a day and return tomorrow. The next morning, Kenichi returns to tackle the stumps. He starts digging but quickly realizes it's far too much work for someone his age. Unwilling to wreck his back, Kenichi decides to buy a backhoe from his store. But when it arrives, he stares at the massive machine. feeling both impressed and regretful because he just spent 1.2 million yen on heavy machinery to avoid manual labor, so he starts to feel a little regret. However, Kenichi realizes that the amount of effort it saves him might actually make it a worthwhile investment after all. Kenichi then starts the backhoe's engine but quickly realizes a major problem. It runs on diesel, and his store doesn't sell diesel fuel. Panic sets in as he considers the massive waste it would be if the machine became useless after spending so much money on it. Thinking quickly, Kenichi recalls that diesel can be homemade by mixing kerosene with additives. However, he hesitates, knowing that getting the proportions wrong could ruin the backhoe's engine. To play it safe, Kenichi decides to test his mixture on a diesel generator first. He carefully fills the generator's tank with his concoction, starts it up, and to his relief, it works perfectly. Confident his homemade diesel will work for the backhoe, he plans to return the next day to finish clearing the forest. That night, Kenichi realizes another issue. The sheer number of bugs in the woods is unbearable. Determined to solve the problem, he visits a local magic shop the next day to purchase some bug-repellent magic stones. The shop's wizard owner greets Kenichi and asks where he's from since he hasn't seen him around before. Kenichi explains that he's a foreigner who recently opened a shop in town and is looking for bug-repellent stones. The wizard informs him that the stones cost 3 silver coins, which Kenichi finds expensive. Hoping to strike a deal, he offers the wizard 2 oranges as part of the payment. The wizard, intrigued by the exotic fruit he's never seen before, agrees to the trade and lowers the price. Later, Kenichi discusses the wizard with Anama, who tells him the wizard is well known for his vast knowledge and is a good person to befriend. She contrasts this with the town's most infamous figure, Shaka, the leader of a notorious bandit group. His wanted posters are plastered everywhere, and the reward for his capture is huge. And that same night, Shaka organizes a raid on a carriage transporting slaves, leaving everyone wondering what he plans to do with them. The following day, Kenichi returns to the forest, finally ready to use his backhoe. His earlier regrets vanish as he discovers how much easier the machine makes his work and how much fun it is to operate. With the stumps cleared, Kenichi feels unstoppable in his quest for a peaceful life in the woods. However, his excitement is tempered by the realization that his bank account is running dangerously low after purchasing the backhoe. So for now, he decides to pause any further construction and focus on rebuilding his finances.
The next day, Kenichi brings some sugar to sell to Mallow, but Mallow explains that while sugar and salt are extremely valuable commodities, the nation holds exclusive rights to them, meaning they can't be purchased from private sellers like Kenichi. This news is a letdown for Kenichi, as he had hoped to rake in a huge profit from selling them. However, Mallow shares some good news. Kenichi's jewelry has been a massive success. Curious to see what else Kenichi has to offer, Mallow is amazed when Kenichi unveils his latest creations. With those items sold, Kenichi adds another 3 million yen worth of gold and silver to his growing fortune. With his newfound wealth, Kenichi is finally able to afford a log cabin. The price seems like a steal, but he's shocked when the delivery arrives because it doesn't come assembled, and he realizes he'll have to build the cabin himself. While the situation is less than ideal, it explains why the price was so low. With no other choice, Kenichi starts working. Thankfully, the assembly process is straightforward, mainly involving putting together wooden planks. And by sheer luck, the beast folk were hunting nearby, and when they saw him, they stopped by to lend a hand because they were grateful for the kindness Kenichi had shown them before. As the construction progresses, Kenichi continues running his stall, and weeks fly by. To support the beast folk helping him, Kenichi buys a grill to keep them fed and a one-man tent to camp out near his build site. And after nearly a month of effort, the cabin is finally complete. Kenichi has the beast folk to thank for their hard work, and they celebrate together. To make his new home comfortable, Kenichi buys essentials like a bed and blankets for proper sleep. He starts thinking about additional improvements, like electricity, painting the walls, and fixing the roof. Over the next month, Kenichi makes significant progress. He builds a garden with a sturdy fence and sets up a bathroom that recycles waste into fertilizer. The toilet alone cost him over 200,000 yen, while he spent 30,000 yen on a kitchen sink. And for electricity, Kenichi installs 20 solar panels connected to a battery system, which set him back nearly 400,000 yen. His favorite purchase, however, is a drum bath he bought for 25,000 yen. Although he has to haul water from the river using gasoline tanks, the joy of taking his first proper bath since arriving in this world makes it worth every effort. Kenichi takes a moment to appreciate the fruits of his labor. This is the epitome of slow, living a peaceful life in another world as the ruler of his own little domain. With a satisfied grin, he declares that his idyllic new life has officially begun. Later, Kenichi thanks Azalea as he prepares to leave the inn, explaining he won't be staying there anymore. However, she insists she's the one who should be thanking him. The next morning, Kenichi sets off with the camera he bought to take pictures of the wilderness. He couldn't be happier with his slow, idyllic life, but his peace is short-lived. While wandering, Kenichi accidentally triggers a trap and soon finds himself dodging a hail of arrows. He realizes he's under attack by beast folk who have noticed him living in the forest. As they discuss killing him, Kenichi fully grasps the harsh reality of this world. Determined to survive, he goes on the offensive, pulling out his slingshot and firing off several shots Rambo style. He scares the beast folk further by using fireworks, then terrifies them into retreating with his backhoe. After the commotion, Kenichi stumbles upon an injured cat, which was struck by one of the beast folk's arrows. The cat, clearly wary of him, refuses to let Kenichi get close. Knowing the animal could be dangerous, Kenichi devises a solution by buying some floor cushions and a neck guard for protection. With his gear in place, he carefully removes the arrow and disinfects the wound. He also administers antibiotics to prevent infection and gives the cat painkillers to ease its suffering. Kenichi worries that the cat might not survive in its current state, so he attempts to put it in his item box, only to discover it doesn't work. Left with no other choice, Kenichi brings the injured animal back to his home, and there he buys it a pet blanket and sets up a space for it to recover. Unfortunately, the cat barely moves, leaving Kenichi uncertain whether it will make it. Hoping for advice, he visits the old mage to ask if he knows how to heal the cat, but the mage only suggests selling the hide for profit. Anama doesn't have any solutions either, but Miley offers some helpful information. She explains that bobcats are revered as messengers of the gods and expresses her desire to see it. Returning home, Kenichi is relieved to see that the cat has started eating. Miley identifies the attackers as dogmen responsible for firing the arrow, and to stop the cat from licking its wound, Kenichi buys it a collar. Impressed by Kenichi's kindness, Miley decides to thank him on the bobcat's behalf. She then hunts down some birds, and Kenichi prepares them on a portable grill, and after seasoning the meat, Miley takes a bite and is blown away by the flavor. She then asks to stay the night so she can help keep an eye on the bobcat and doesn't even mind that Kenichi only has one bed. Days later, the bobcat shows signs of a full recovery, so Kenichi shifts his focus to farming. He buys plants and fertilizer from Shangri-La, but realizes that hauling water from the river every day would be a nightmare. To solve this, he starts planning to dig a well. That night, Kenichi has a peculiar dream and wakes to find the bobcat nudging him. It seems to have fully healed and wants to go outside, and when he opens the door, it dashes off into the wilderness, and Kenichi wishes it well in its new life. With the bobcat gone, Kenichi decides to take a short break from his stall and focuses entirely on digging the well. To do this, he purchases an earth drill and an electric well pump. After a week and 50,000 yen spent, Kenichi finally has running water. Just as he's enjoying this success, Primula shows up, saying she hadn't seen him at the market. She explains that Miley told her where to find him and is astonished by the impressive setup he's built, and particularly curious about the giant metal object behind his house. Kenichi quickly improvises, calling it his loyal servant and claiming it's his familiar. Primula takes him at his word, now convinced that Kenichi can use magic. Kenichi, sensing the misunderstanding, rolls with it and asks her to keep this secret to herself. He then points out that the city gate is about to close for the night and guesses that she intends to stay at his place. Primula cheekily turns the tables, acting as though it was Kenichi who invited her to stay. Kenichi warns her that he only has one bed, but Primula shrugs it off, clearly unfazed. She's also astonished to learn that Kenichi has a bath, which only sweetens the deal. Later that night, Primula nervously gets into the bath, but panics when the darkness spooks her, so she calls out for Kenichi and insists he stay nearby to ease her nerves. Kenichi makes sure she's comfortable, but when he tries to leave, she stubbornly refuses to let him go, so he suggests she take a bath during the day if she's afraid of the dark, but Primula refuses to miss the opportunity. Kenichi then reminds her that they don't know each other well, and that he could be dangerous. However, Primula brushes off his warning, saying she's heard from Miley all about the kind things he's done for the bobcat. Later that night, Kenichi buys Primula a bathrobe, and she immediately suggests they sell it. While Kenichi wasn't planning on selling bathrobes, Primula insists that their customers would love such a luxurious product. After some thought, Kenichi agrees to a limited sale, and Primula beams with gratitude. He then buys an 8,000 yen nightgown, leaving her stunned by its softness and quality. She even jokes that with goods like this, Kenichi could become the top merchant in the entire kingdom. Kenichi, however, quickly dismisses the idea, pointing out that attracting the attention of nobles would bring nothing but headaches. He just wants to earn enough to enjoy a quiet, peaceful life filled with good food. Understanding his worries, Primula promises that the Mallow Company will never reveal him as their supplier. Later, Kenichi surprises her by sketching a quick but flattering portrait of her, and the two head to bed. In the middle of the night, Primula quietly whispers to see if Kenichi is awake, but he pretends to be fast asleep because he knows exactly what she wants. Meanwhile, the mysterious girl from earlier is shown being mistreated by Bandit. Shaga, the bandit leader, seems pleased with their loot and listens as his men tell him they've just received a new job. The following day, Kenichi escorts Primula back home, knowing full well that her father will have questions about her spending the night at his place. However, Kenichi is taken aback when Mallow simply thanks him for taking care of his daughter. Mallow admits he'd been worried about her and jokes about who she could possibly take after. Kenichi then presents Mallow with the bathrobes, which he explains are made with exceptional materials. He even pulls out a sample of hot lingerie as a joke and says that this shit would make any man who sees it look like The Rock. But Mallow looks so overwhelmed that Kenichi quickly clarifies he wasn't serious. Just then, a maid walks in carrying a stack of documents. Mallow explains that the nation has implemented a new system for keeping ledgers, forcing him to rewrite them. He mentions that this system, called double-entry bookkeeping, was invented in the neighboring empire. This revelation shocks Kenichi, as he recognizes double-entry bookkeeping from his old world. Mallow further explains that the empire's rapid growth is thanks to the inventions of a mysterious man. Mallow then invites Kenichi to join him as he reviews a new prototype product he recently purchased. Kenichi is stunned when he sees that the prototype is a pitcher pump, and Mallow is impressed that Kenichi already knows about it. Kenichi, however, is shocked because this pump is something straight out of his old world. The realization that two such items double-entry bookkeeping, and now the pitcher pump exist here, makes Kenichi wonder if someone else from his old world has been reincarnated in this one. Feeling a mix of frustration and competitive spirit, Kenichi tries to showcase a new type of vehicle design, hoping to impress them. However, the attempt backfires as they burst into laughter, assuming his odd-looking sketch was a joke. Primula, on the other hand, begins visiting Kenichi more frequently, often staying overnight. Then one evening, she reveals that she will be leaving on a month-long business trip, and during their conversation, Primula boldly asks for that hot see-through clothing piece Kenichi had shown her earlier. Surprised, Kenichi jokingly assumes there's a special guy she wants to impress. Primula confirms this and adds that he's here right now. Kenichi, in his humble manner, assumes she means him but tells her to value herself more and not fall for an older guy like him. Primula, however, is steadfast, explaining that even her father doesn't mind her spending time with Kenichi. Confused but too tired to argue, Kenichi decides to put the conversation on hold, so Primula asks him to sleep in the same bed for the night. Begrudgingly, Kenichi agrees, but he's still baffled about what she sees in an older guy like him. The next morning, Primula departs for town, and Kenichi is visited by an armored man. It's the same man who previously purchased a sword from him, now introducing himself as Paul. Paul explains that he's investigating rumors about a strange man living deep in the forest, then begins asking questions about Kenichi's peculiar tools and setup. Kenichi brushes off the questions, attributing everything to magic, which prompts Paul to ask if Kenichi is a mage, and to ensure Paul keeps quiet, Kenichi gives him a stack of steel as a bribe. explaining that he's out of swords, but Paul can take the steel to a blacksmith to have one made. Grateful for the gift, Paul decides to share an intriguing rumor he's heard. He tells Kenichi about a mage in the Empire who has demonstrated a bizarre, unheard of spell. This spell apparently creates a large amount of a yellowish dipping sauce that the mage refers to as mayo something. Kenichi's jaw drops as Paul confirms that it's called mayonnaise. Furthermore, Paul adds that this same mage is rumored to have taken down a ferocious dragon. Kenichi is dumbfounded, wondering not only how someone could defeat a dragon with mayonnaise, but also what kind of person managed to reincarnate into the Empire. The story unfolds as the scene shifts to a month after Primula's departure. Kenichi anticipates the return of the Mallow Trading Company's caravan, expecting it to arrive at any moment. Planning to stop by later to meet Primula, he suddenly noticed some commotion in town and decided to check it out. From the chatter around him, he learned that a caravan had been attacked and Primula had been kidnapped. Looking around, he spotted Mallow pleading with passing adventurers for help, but no one was willing to step in since the culprit was Shaga. Even the guild and the knights refused to assist, claiming they needed several days to prepare. Seeing Mallow in such despair, Kenichi couldn't help but feel sorry for him. The crowd around them didn't seem interested in challenging a bandit leader with 50 men under his command, choosing instead to hang back and watch, while Mallow continued to cry out for someone to save his daughter. Elsewhere, Primula was thrown into a cell. She demanded to know what the bandits planned to do with her, and Shaga smirked, telling her that with a hot body like hers, it was no surprise that some perverted noble wanted her for himself. Back in town, Mallow had now turned to Kenichi, desperately begging him for help. Kenichi hesitated for a moment, but ultimately assured him that he would rescue Primula. He knew he was being reckless because there was no way someone with his limited combat experience could take on an entire band of bandits. But there were moments in life when a man simply couldn't back down, so he told Mallow that he would need money to make the necessary preparations, and without hesitation, Mallow handed it over. Meanwhile, a few catfolk who had been observing the situation quickly ran off to find Miley. Mallow then informs Kenichi that the bandit base is roughly 40 leagues west, hidden in the old ruins of a castle on the mountainside. Kenichi realizes that if it's 50 kilometers away, he's going to need a ride, so he decides to buy a truck. He then asks everyone around him to step back as he prepares to use summoning magic. When they do, he buys the truck, and as it appears, he climbs on top, explaining to the stunned onlookers that this is a metal carriage that follows his commands. He then asks if anyone is willing to join him on this mission, offering weapons and pointing out the high bounty on Shaga's head. He insists that, with a proper plan, they can take them down. However, no one steps forward, believing they stand no chance against a band of 50 men, and they back away, unwilling to take the risk. As Kenichi prepares to leave, a bobcat suddenly jumps onto his truck, and he realizes that it wants to accompany him. He thanks it, appreciating the support. Just then, the catfolk arrive, relieved that they made it in time. They inform him that they will be joining his mission, and he expresses his gratitude. He then hands them weapons, arming them with axes and long machetes, and he gives Miley a bow. At that moment, Paul arrives and offers to join them, and Kenichi is pleased to have him but questions why he's in full armor. So Paul explains that he went to retrieve his sword and decided to put on his armor to fully prepare for battle. He unsheathes his blade, and Kenichi instantly recognizes it as being forged from the steel he had given him. Paul then mentions that taking down Shaga and his gang would be an ideal first mission for his wolf fang, and suddenly, the old mage steps forward, offering to join them as well. Kenichi hesitates, telling him this mission isn't suited for an old man, but the mage merely smirks and fires a fireball into the air. He declares that he was once an adventurer and assures Kenichi that he will be a valuable asset in combat. He also admits that he is curious about the unique magic Kenichi wields. Seeing his capability, Kenichi decides to bring him along. Just then, Anama approaches, asking to accompany them. Kenichi reminds her that they are heading into battle, not on a trading journey. However, Anama insists that while she may not be useful in combat, she can still prepare their meals. Seeing her determination, Kenichi agrees to let her come. He then turns to the gathered townsfolk and adventurers, offering them one last chance to join, but they are unwilling to get involved, so they quickly vacate the area. Just then, Mallow desperately asks to go with Kenichi, but Kenichi refuses, telling him that he should focus on getting his wound treated first. He reassures him that Primula will return home safely, and hearing this, Mallow is relieved, though still visibly worried about his daughter. Afterwards, Kenichi registers himself at the Adventurers Guild, paying a single silver coin for the registration, and formally submits a request to take down Shaga. We then see his group heading out of town, but as they pass through the streets, murmurs spread among the townspeople. Many believe that Kenichi and his group are simply going to take Mallow's money and flee, convinced that a handful of amateurs stand no chance against Shaga. But despite the doubtful stares and whispers, Kenichi ignores them, keeping his focus on the mission. Meanwhile, at the bandit hideout, Anemone hands Primula a piece of bread for lunch, but Primula quickly notices that Anemone looks just as hungry as she is, so without hesitation, she tells her to eat the bread instead. As Anemone eats, Primula asks her if she is also being held captive, and she nods. With a reassuring smile, Primula tells her not to worry, promising that they will get out of there together. Anemone looks at her doubtfully and asks how that's possible, so Primula simply states that someone will come to help them, and when Anemone asks if she means God, Primula sees the hope in her eyes and nods without further explanation. Back on the road, Kenichi and the others continue their journey, and as night falls, they set up camp and prepare dinner. Kenichi makes a simple vegetable soup, but as they eat, the catfolk notice the bobcat enjoying some cat food. Curious, they ask Kenichi if they can try some, and he hands them a portion. To their surprise, they find it delicious. Seeing their reactions, the old mage gives in to his own curiosity and takes a bite, only to realize that he likes it as well. After their meal, Kenichi gathers the group and explains the strategy to take on the bandits. Everyone listens carefully, and no one raises any objections to the plan. Aware of her own limitations, Anama volunteers to stay behind, knowing she would only slow them down. Later, Miley moves ahead to scout the enemy base, using a transceiver that Kenichi gave her, and when Kenichi speaks to her through the device, she gets amazed. Kenichi then explains that it's a magic item that enables long-distance communication. The old mage, watching closely, remarks that even the Empire likely doesn't possess such technology, so Kenichi tells him to act as if he never saw it. With Miley now scouting ahead, Kenichi decides it's time for the rest of them to move. But before they depart, Kenichi turns to Anama and instructs her to return to the Adventurers Guild if he does not return within a day. He tells her to report that the mission to defeat the bandits has failed, and she nods in understanding. As they approach the bandits' camp under the cover of night, Miley scouts ahead and reports back to Kenichi. She spots guards stationed at the watchtower, while the rest of the bandits are inside getting drunk. Seeing this as the perfect opportunity, Kenichi decides it's time to strike. Realizing he's about to dive into his first real battle, one of the cat folk hands him a nut to eat. Without thinking much of it, he pops it into his mouth only to discover too late that it's some kind of drug. A wave of euphoria washes over him, leaving him feeling absurdly happy despite the impending danger. With adrenaline and whatever strange substance now coursing through his veins, Kenichi jumps into his truck and gives Miley the signal to take out the watchtower guard. The bandits stationed there notice the approaching vehicle, mistaking it for some kind of monster, but before they can raise the alarm, Miley expertly takes them down with precise shots. She swiftly returns to the truck just as the old mage steps up, unleashing an explosion spell that obliterates the castle gate. The blast shakes the entire camp, sending the drunken bandits scrambling in confusion. Kenichi is impressed and asks for another explosion spell, but the old mage regretfully informs him that he's out of juice. With no time to waste, the rest of the group charges in. The cat folk slice through the panicked bandits with ease, while the knight tests his new sword on them. A bandit then attempts to ambush Kenichi, but the bobcat leaps to his defense, and Miley finishes the attacker off with a quick shot. The commotion draws out even more bandits, but Kenichi is prepared. With a wicked grin, he summons his backhoe and drives it like a maniac straight at them. The monstrous machine barrels toward the terrified bandits, sending them screaming in all directions. As Kenichi and his team continue cutting down the opposition, it becomes painfully clear that these bandits are little more than second second-rate thugs because they can't even put a dent in his group, while wreaking havoc with the backhoe. Kenichi corners a few fleeing bandits and demands to know where Primula is. As he forces the machine into a secluded section of the camp, it unintentionally uncovers an underground cell, revealing Anemone and several other captives. And seeing Kenichi in his massive machine, Anemone stares in awe, wondering if he might be some kind of god. But Kenichi quickly realizes that Primula isn't among the prisoners. A loud, furious shout echoes through the camp. Shaga emerges, holding Primula hostage. Primula's face lights up with relief upon seeing Kenichi, knowing he's come to rescue her. Meanwhile, Shaga sizes up the group, surprised that someone capable of controlling monsters has come all this way for the girl. Kenichi demands that he let her go, but Shaga has other ideas. With a smug smirk, he presses his blade against Primula's melons and sneers, ordering them to drop their weapons or she dies. They ignore him, and in frustration Shaga rips off part of Primula's clothes. He sneers, saying he would have enjoyed her properly if he had known things would end like this. Kenichi then quietly buys a laser sight and instructs Miley to shoot Shaga as soon as he blinds him with the light. She nods, understanding the plan. When Kenichi flashes the light into Shaga's eyes, he instinctively lets go of Primula, and Miley takes the shot. Primula immediately runs toward Kenichi, but Shaga refuses to let her escape. But before he can grab her again, an unseen force suddenly throws him forward, landing him right in front of Miley. She coldly tells him she won't miss this time and fires, killing him instantly. With Shaga finally dead, Primula rushes into Kenichi's arms, hugging him tightly. But thanks to the lingering effects of that damn drug from earlier, Kenichi suddenly feels an overwhelming urge to push her down and claim her right then and there, but he forces himself to keep his instincts in check. As things settle, one of the cat folk quickly heads back to inform Anama of the situation. Meanwhile, inside the castle, the rescued girls take a much-needed bath while Kenichi stores away his backhoe. He provides them with fresh clothes and asks Primula to assist Anemone with washing up. He also hands her a pair of scissors, requesting that she trim Anemone's hair. Seeing the scissors, Primula's merchant instincts immediately kick in, and she asks if she can sell them through her company. In her excitement, she accidentally lets her towel slip. While Kenichi thinks she truly has the mind of a merchant, the other girls quickly alert her, and she gets embarrassed. After their bath, the girls emerge looking refreshed, and Anemone appears completely transformed. Kenichi introduces himself and asks for her name, and as they talk, the group pieces together that a noble was behind the kidnapping. Anemone then hands a letter to Paul, and upon reading it, the old mage realizes why the guild and the knights delayed taking action. It was because of noble interference. Kenichi praises Anemone for her bravery in revealing this information. Later, Anama arrives at the castle, relieved to see that everyone is safe. She notices how small Anemone is and comments that the girl is the same age her child would have been if they were alive. Kenichi is surprised to learn that she once had a child, and Anama solemnly explains that she did, but she passed away during the plague. That night, as everyone settles in to rest, Kenichi lays down exhausted. He notes that there was some grim discussion earlier about disposing of the bandit corpses, but he's too damn tired to think about it now. And with that, he drifts off to sleep, ready to return to Dahlia in the morning. Later, we see Kenichi and his crew returning to town, where Mallow and the rest await them with eager anticipation. Pulling up in their truck, Mallow's face lights up as he sees his daughter dashing toward him. In a heartfelt reunion, they embrace tightly, both relieved and delighted that everyone is safe. Mallow's eyes are drawn to the stylish blouse that Primula is wearing, and Primula reveals that it was a gift from Kenichi, and they both agree that the blouse is quite valuable and bound to fetch a handsome price. Kenichi, unsurprised that even in these circumstances, business talk finds its way into their conversations, listens as Mallow expresses his gratitude for rescuing his daughter. Mallow then asks if Kenichi has secured the loot in his item box, and Kenichi says that he did. The narrative then flashes back a bit to reveal that the catfolk had once asked Kenichi to store the bandit heads in his item box. They explained that returning the severed heads was essential to prove that they had vanquished the bandits, and given the enormous bounty this time, it would also serve to verify his identity by face. Although it seemed a bit odd for his first time handling such a task, they assured him that he would soon get used to it. Miley warned him that the heads tend to start smelling as time passes, making it challenging to carry them in the usual way. Luckily, his item box made this a non-issue. Kenichi mused that he should have expected such peculiarities in this other world and proceeded to stow the heads away in his item box. He also mentioned that he had gathered various items stolen by the bandits from their hideout, about 100 gold coins, along with assorted rugs, pottery, gems, swords, and other valuable treasures. He recalled that before leaving the bandit hideout, he had asked the girls if they wanted to return home, offering them a ride. Some of the girls admitted that they couldn't go back since everyone they knew at home had perished. Seizing the moment, Kenichi asked if they would prefer to come with him to Dahlia instead. They agreed, and he instructed them to let him know who wished to return and who wanted to join him on the journey. He explained that Dahlia was a vast city with plenty of job opportunities, and Primula even offered them the assistance of the Mallow Trading Company. Kenichi then inquired of Anemone about her home, and she replied that she hailed from Europe Village. Primula added that her village lay some 800 kilometers away. Kenichi offered to take her there, but she declined. Anama then surmised that her family might have sold her off to reduce the burden of too many mouths to feed. Undeterred, Kenichi asked if she would rather come along to Dahlia with them, and she agreed. Later, the group continued their journey toward Dahlia, with Kenichi dropping off those girls who wished to return to their own village. The trek took several days, and at long last they reached the town. Back in the present, the scene shifts to the Adventurers Guild, where the cat folk present Shaga's head to the receptionist, who is visibly horrified by the sight. Shortly thereafter, another male receptionist approaches to inquire about the details specifically. He asks how many heads there are. The cat folk attempt to provide an accurate count, but since numbers are not their strong suit, they fail to recall the exact total. Kenichi steps in and declares that there are 52 heads, a figure that surprises everyone in the guild. The cat folk then remark that it will likely take them an entire day to inspect all the heads, while Kenichi takes a moment to catch his breath as the inspection proceeds. The old mage soon approaches Kenichi, complimenting him on his impressive magical abilities and the remarkable capacity of his item box. He warns that the nobles will make life difficult for him if they ever learn of his exploit. Kenichi, however, assures him that as long as he keeps his mouth shut, such trouble will not come his way. The old mage, not inclined to divulge any secrets, listens as Kenichi casually adds that he will simply leave town if matters deteriorate. Then, Paul informs Kenichi that he is off to meet the local lord, Count Asclepius. Realizing that this meeting will likely involve reporting that nobles were implicated in the incident, Paul confirms this and then departs. Kenichi later mentions that it took the guild until nightfall to complete the inspection of the heads, with the total bounty amounting to 861 gold coins. Notably, Anama refused to claim any share of the reward since she had not contributed any labor. Instead, she asked Kenichi if she might take charge of caring for Anemone, promising to treat her as if she were her own child. Kenichi had no objections to this arrangement and eventually left the guild. Outside in town, Kenichi observes the townspeople jubilantly celebrating the defeat of Shaga and his gang, and as he departs, Anemone trails behind him. Meanwhile, inside the guild, Anama had just brought water for both herself and Anemone, but to her dismay, Anemone is nowhere to be found. Elsewhere, Kenichi explains that he's chosen to remain in town for the day since the gates have already been closed. He makes his way to Azalea's inn, where he hears a bard singing a lively tune about their group's victory over Shaga. Azalea, delighted to see him again, greets him warmly. She teases, asking if it's true that he vanquished a horde of bandits. Kenichi downplays the tale, insisting he did not, and privately muses that if she ever learned the truth, she'd be clamoring to claim the reward from him. The conversation takes a personal turn when Azalea brings up an old promise, asking if he still remembers that he vowed to make her his lover if his business were to succeed. Kenichi is taken aback, wondering if she somehow knows that his fortunes have recently improved. He denies ever making such a pledge and in return asks if she might spare him an empty room. With a hint of playful theatrics, she feigns tears and questions whether she was nothing more than a fleeting dalliance in his eyes. Tired to continue this shit show, Kenichi retreats to his room, silently thinking that it's only a matter of time before the nobles catch wind of his exploits. That night, as Kenichi slept, Azalea quietly slipped into his bed. Even though he mumbled that he was utterly exhausted from the day, she began to undress, intent on pursuing their intimacy. But their damn moment was abruptly interrupted when Anemone entered the room, causing them to immediately cease their love actions. The next morning, Kenichi reveals that in the end, Anemone decided to stay with him. He then heads over to Anama's shop, intending to hand her off to her rightful care, but to his surprise, she isn't there. Undeterred, he sets about his daily errand. First, he stops by a weapon shop, where he sells the arms he had recovered from the bandits for a total of 32 gold coins. Next, he offloads a collection of vases and assorted valuables to the Mallow Trading Company, netting him 35 gold coins. Finally, he takes some furniture to the old mage's shop and earns another 22 gold coins from the sale. In the end, the total reward came to 89 gold coins, which they divided evenly 7 ways, each person pocketing 12 coins. Kenichi decided to present the dresses to Anama and the other women who had stayed behind, and afterward he headed back to his house. There, they found Anama waiting, delighted to see that Anemone was safe. Once inside, Anama discovered that Anemone wished to remain with Kenichi. She told the girl that if she came with her, she'd learn the ins and outs of running a business. But Anemone refused. Kenichi then asked if she was absolutely sure. When she confirmed, Anama agreed to let her stay with Kenichi for now, promising that she could always return if things got too rough. Later on, Kenichi escorted Anama to a carriage bound for town and then returned to his own home, where he asked Anemone why she wanted to stick with him. She admitted it was because he had fed her until she was completely satisfied, and they later enjoyed a hearty dinner together. Following dinner, at Anemone's insistence, they took a bath together and eventually spent the night in each other's company. However, later that night, a group of shady-looking men prowled around Kenichi's house to keep an eye on him, and he ended up having a terrible nightmare that left him waking in distress. About half a month later, news came that Paul had been elevated to Baron for his role in defeating Shaga. He was given charge of a small territory, tasked with recruiting new settlers, and even on the lookout for a wife. There were even rumors circulating that a noble had been stripped of their rank, something Kenichi found hardly surprising, given that bandits had been hired to kidnap Primula. Not long after, while out in town, they noticed a peculiar bicycle rolling by, which Anemone identified as a dray sign. Kenichi recalled that initially, Mallow and Primula had laughed at his idea. However, once the dust had settled after the Shaga incident, they recognized his foresight summoning him later. They gave him 5 gold coins for his idea, apologizing for their earlier mockery and even purchasing the rights to the dray sign. Soon after, Kenichi sensed someone was tailing him, though he couldn't pinpoint any suspicious figure, yet he was sure he was being followed. Eventually, the guild managed to wrap up all their paperwork and distributed the reward. Kenichi used his share to repay the funds he had borrowed from Mallow for his preparations, and he split the remainder among the women he'd rescued. In the end, only a single coin remained, which he handed over to Anama, and then she offered Anemone a fruit to eat. And then once again, Kenichi sensed someone was watching him, and this time he pinpointed the culprit. Grabbing Anemone's hand, he bolted from the scene, only to notice an entire group in hot pursuit. He dashed through narrow alleys, deliberately knocking over boxes to slow them down. Yet his escape was thwarted when a carriage intercepted him and the pursuers managed to capture him. They ordered him to climb aboard quietly, explaining that their employer wished to meet him. While feigning compliance, Kenichi quickly purchased some firecrackers and lobbed them into the carriage and around the chasing men. The resulting commotion gave him the perfect opening to slip away from under the carriage. Even as they continued to chase him, he procured a crossbow and successfully intimidated them into retreat with his threats. Just then Mallow arrived, inquiring about the commotion. Kenichi and Anemone boarded Mallow's carriage, briefing him on the men chasing them. Mallow surmised that the anti-monarchy faction was likely behind the pursuit and advised Kenichi to seek help from the local lord, and he's a man known for his decent nature. Although Kenichi trusted Mallow's judgment, he suspected that the lord would inevitably impose taxes in exchange for his assistance that he'd find impossible to decline. And then he alighted at the edge of town. Meanwhile, back at Mallow's compound, Mallow recounted to his daughter how he had met Kenichi earlier. She recalled that they had yet to thank him for earning their family name and explained that the Lord had commended them for inventing the Dre sign so much so that he even permitted them to adopt a family name derived from it. As a result, she is now known as Primula ni Dre sign. Mallow then solemnly told his daughter that their company owed a tremendous debt to Kenichi and that they must find a way to repay it. Early the next day, Primula is busy getting ready. She recalls how at first she had pegged Kenichi as just a boring old man with a tiny stall. But as she got to know him, she discovered he was both knowledgeable and gentle, qualities that shone through in the exceptional products he stored, which had earned their company handsome profits and a respected family name. This reputation made her desperately try to win him over, even if her efforts initially seemed futile. Yet when he came to save her, it became clear that he truly cherished her. Convinced by his actions, she decided to be with him. However, when she went to his house, she was surprised to find that both the house and the surrounding fields had vanished. Meanwhile, Kenichi is seen riding out of town on an off-road bike. Along the way, he meets Fayu, and they stop to chat. Fayu soon learns that Kenichi has become a merchant. He bombards him with questions, even wondering if the famed Dre sign everyone's been raving about is the custom model Kenichi now boasts. Kenichi confirms that it's indeed specially made for him, and Fayu asks where he's headed next. Kenichi recalls packing everything into his item box and leaving his old home behind. Although he sometimes wondered if his coming here had a deeper meaning, he was happy to know that his coming here had saved Primula. As he prepares to continue, a bobcat appears. Kenichi bids the creature farewell and wishes it a good life, only to notice that the bobcat follows him, as if it too wants to come along. Back in the present, Kenichi tells Fayu that he's currently on a journey with no fixed destination. When Fayu asks about the two companions with him, Kenichi simply replies that they are his family. With that, he rides off, and Fayu offers a silent prayer for his safe travels. Later, we see Kenichi at a serene riverside where he is engaged in fishing. And while cooking his fresh catch over a modest fire, he explains that they are in search of a new place to call home. He notes that they're currently about 100 kilometers from Dahlia, with the town of Astrantia lying just 5 to 6 kilometers ahead. Then once his fish soup is ready, Kenichi serves it to Anemone and his bobcat, commenting that this laid-back, unhurried lifestyle truly exemplifies as slow living. He also mentioned that earlier Anemone said that she was 12 years old, but he remains somewhat unconvinced, as she appears rather slight for that age. Soon after, we see Kenichi flying a drone, which excites Anemone. She wonders if it might be a form of magic. Kenichi confirms that it is indeed magical and muses that they need to find a permanent place to settle down. Observing that the river they are camping near flows into a lake, he decides to head over there with his companions in search of an ideal spot to establish their base. Riding his bike to the lake, they eventually discover a promising location. To playfully impress Anemone, Kenichi pretends to cast a spell to summon his house, and to her delight, his house materializes. Once everything is in order, Kenichi begins pondering a name for the bobcat. After several attempts, he settles on Vel, short for velvet. Later, we see him teaching Anemone how to read and write, and it's clear she's quickly catching on. He then moves on to instruct her in mathematics, though like most children, she isn't particularly fond of math. As she works on some problems, Kenichi contemplates his need for an alternative fuel source, given that kerosene is expensive. He remembers a segment he once saw about biodiesel made from used cooking oil and decides to explore the idea further, purchasing several books on the subject. We then see Kenichi immersed in reading these books when Anemone asks what he is doing. He explains that he's studying the texts, and she expresses her desire to read as well. However, he points out that the books are in a language she isn't yet familiar with. Undeterred, she shows willingness to learn, and Kenichi starts teaching her Japanese. The next day, we see Kenichi carefully draping camouflage over his solar panels. Suddenly, he hears rustling from the bushes, and thinking a monster might be lurking, he readies himself for battle. To his surprise, it turns out to be Maeli, who leaps out with a bright smile. She chides him for leaving her behind and explains that she had to work hard to track his scent and make it here. She then joins up with Anemone, who is equally delighted to see her and Kenichi announces that Miley will be staying with them from now on. Later, as they enjoy lunch together, Kenichi asks Miley if Dahlia has remained the same since he left. She recalls that while she was in town, Paul proposed to Primula, which prompts Kenichi to remark that it's fitting she's marrying someone her own age, though he grumbles about missing the ceremony. After lunch, they all take a bath and later settle down to read picture books. Miley laughs that even she can understand the stories, thanks to the illustrations, and Kenichi muses that such picture books might be a promising product. Uncertain about crafting books based on fairy tales from his own world, he asks the girls if any familiar tales exist here. They list several, and Kenichi grows curious about one titled The Forest Elf. Anemone explains that the story tells of an elf living deep in the forest who falls in love with a human prince, a union vehemently opposed by both elves and humans. The elf nearly meets her end at their hands, but thanks to the fairies, she escapes and eventually finds happiness in the realm of the fairies. After their conversation, Kenichi is seen finishing a drawing for a picture book based on this tale. He then uses a printing machine kit to produce a copy of the book. The girls are amazed by the result, and he then binds the pages with another machine. Finally, he presents a copy to each of them, and they are overjoyed to receive their own little treasure. A boat then approaches their house, and Kenichi asks Miley to take Anemone and keep her safe, as there might be company arriving. She nods in understanding, and Kenichi steps out to greet the guests, a crossbow in hand. The newcomers calmly instruct him to lower his weapon, revealing that they are residents of Santanka, the village across the lake. Kenichi inquires what they want, wondering if any local laws restrict habitation here. They assure him that there are none. They were merely curious, concerned that bandits might have set up camp in the area. Kenichi explains that he's merely a merchant, though they comment that he appears rather well armed. He clarifies that he had to flee his previous city due to trouble, so he prefers to be prepared for any eventuality. At that moment, the bobcat comes over to Kenichi, clearly fawning over him. The beast man concludes that there's no way Kenichi could be a bad person. The man on the boat then introduces himself as Crouton, while the beast man introduces himself as Nyanias. Kenichi also introduces himself, and Crouton reveals that he used to work for the government in Astrantia. Nyanias surveys Kenichi's home and remarks that everything seems in order, prompting Crouton to apologize for having doubted him. Noticing the picture books Kenichi has produced, Crouton buys one for his daughter. After their brief visit, they depart, and Kenichi enjoys lunch with his companions. Later, we see Kenichi gathering herbs in the forest when Miley appears in a playful mood. She jumps on him, suggesting they should do it now that Anemone isn't around. Though Kenichi is initially hesitant, she drags him along, and they end up indulging in their intimate private rendezvous. Sometime afterward, Kenichi bolts out of his shed and plunges into the river. He explains that the shed had become unbearably hot, and he confesses that he was busy producing diesel dangerous work involving toxic substances, but he managed to succeed in the end. Once finished, he notices that Anemone is upset with him, as he had been completely absorbed in making diesel over the past few days and neglected her. He asks if they should create a new picture book together, but she remains silent. Then, he suggests that they head to Astrantia, and hearing this, Miley volunteers to accompany him, so Anemone happily agrees to join the journey as well. They then set off for the city, trailing after Miley, who's been there several times before. As they approach, Kenichi opts to finish the journey on foot. His first stop is the Adventurers Guild, where he informs the receptionist that he'd like to register with that branch. Both he and Miley present their current guild IDs. The receptionist steps into a back room with them and returns in a hurry, musing whether Kenichi is the fellow who defeated Shaga in Dahlia. Kenichi quickly tells her not to spill his personal details, but when she doesn't quite grasp his meaning, he insists she keep quiet. She agrees and informs him that the registration is complete, charging a fee of 1 silver coin for each of them. Shortly after, they grab a bite to eat. However, the girls aren't pleased with the soup because it lacks a proper stock. After all, they've grown accustomed to his cooking by now. In response, Kenichi adds adds some bonito stock to the soup, which finally wins them over. While eating, Kenichi notices a few suspicious figures prowling about, and he spots Crouton heading down a narrow alley with his daughter. Choosing not to interfere, he continues to survey the town until he and his companions come upon the Snowflake tool shop. Miley explains that the shop is run by an elderly mage, and Kenichi intriguedly ventures inside. There, he finds something rather unusual and asks the old mage to explain its use. The old mage, who bristles at being called old, demonstrates its use by adding water and wine to it, after which the machine processes the mixture and outputs two separate streams. Kenichi deduces that the device is meant to separate substances from a mixture, and he quickly recognizes its potential for producing biodiesel without resorting to harsh chemicals. Curious about its cost, he inquires, and the mage states it's 5 gold coins, so he promptly purchases it. Not long after, Anemone enters carrying a grimoire and tells the mage she wishes to buy it. Kenichi's eyes light up at the sight of a grimoire. He asks if reading one actually enables a person to wield magic, and the mage explains that it does as long as the reader has inherent magical power. Intrigued, Kenichi examines the book and asks its price. It's 10 gold coins. He decides to buy it, but the mage informs him that she cannot let him take it immediately since all grimoires must be registered, and she asks him to return in a week. Later, we see them on their way back when they come across Nyanya's, who is in such a hurry that he quickly takes his leave. Kenichi, sensing that things might soon become chaotic, feels they should head home. Just then, he hears a scream emanating from a nearby alley. Rushing over, he notices that Crouton and his daughter are being threatened by the same suspicious characters from earlier. At first, he tries to ignore the commotion, but when Anemone innocently asks if he isn't going to help them, he finds it impossible to say no. He instructs Miley to look after Anemone, then quickly buys a mask to conceal his identity and confronts the thugs. The thugs demand to know his intentions, and Kenichi sternly warns them to leave the parent-child pair alone or face the consequences of his magic. When they refuse to listen, he intimidates them further by hurling firecrackers and declaring that he will blast them from the inside, next an ultimatum that sends the criminals fleeing in fear. Although Crouton and his daughter are initially startled by his aggressive display, Kenichi soon reveals his true self, calming them down. Shortly thereafter, Nyanya's reappears, relieved to see that Crouton and his daughter are safe. Later on, Crouton thanks Kenichi for saving them, prompting Kenichi to inquire about the identities of the assailants. Crouton explains that they were grunts from Zudera, the notorious spice syndicate men he had arrested several times during his government service, who have been targeting him ever since. Crouton's daughter then asks if these are his friends, and he clarifies that they were the very individuals who had sold him the picture book. Excited by the revelation, she thanks Kenichi for the book, and Anemone adds that she had helped him create it. Hearing this, Mary expresses her own desire to make a book, and Anemone becomes equally enthusiastic about collaborating on one. The two kids quickly bond over their shared passion, and Kenichi feels a warm satisfaction at seeing Anemone make a friend her own age. After that, Crouton's family comes to visit Kenichi and Anemone, and they spend the entire day together enjoying various fun activities. By evening, they say their goodbyes, and soon after, Anemone and Mary begin visiting each other's homes and playing together every day. They even collaborate on a picture book retelling Cinderella. However, things take a sudden turn for the worse. One day, Crouton appears at Kenichi's house clutching all his life savings, urgently asking him to sell some medicine because his daughter has come down with a severe cold. He explains that this is a local disease, one so virulent that most sufferers don't survive the night. Miley suggests he visit the old lady mage for her healing magic, but Crouton lacks the funds for that treatment. Instead, Kenichi provides him with a cold remedy meant for children, instructing him to give it to Mary and leaving the remaining cost on himself. Crouton departs, and Kenichi sets off on his bike. Later, the old lady mage checks on Mary and reveals that her illness is called chicory fever. She explains that her healing magic isn't effective against this particular malady, which can only be cured with the seeds of chicory blooms found near the spring that feeds the river. Determined, Kenichi decides to gather the seeds seeds immediately, and Crouton volunteers to accompany him. Although Kenichi warns that the journey will be dangerous, Crouton assures him he won't slow them down. Nyanias also decides to join the expedition. The three of them prepare to set out, and the old lady mage reminds them that she needs the seeds by tomorrow morning. Understanding the urgency, they embark on their quest. But unbeknownst to them, the thugs from earlier are secretly watching them, pleased to have found Crouton's home, and anticipating that the situation is about to get even more damn interesting. Kenichi and his crew finally arrive at the very source of the river. In that moment, Nyanias suddenly picks up a subtle disturbance approaching, sending a ripple of tension through everyone only to find that it's merely Vel making a dramatic entrance. Afterwards, Kenichi secures a boat to traverse the river and manages to acquire one of those elusive chicory flower seeds. Crouton is overcome with gratitude, declaring that this seed could very well be the savior for his daughter. As they continue their journey, both Nyanias and Vel detect an unexpected commotion on the horizon, hinting that more surprises might be on the way. Kenichi soon realizes that a pack of black wolves is advancing, and he decides it's time for a grudge match. He swiftly summons two swords, handing one to Crouton and the other to Nyanias, and declares that he'll keep the wolves occupied while they rush back to Mary. Though Nyanias and Crouton hesitate to leave him behind, Kenichi insists that if they don't hurry, Mary's life could be in serious danger. Without wasting a moment, Kenichi launches an attack on the black wolves, using a volley of fireworks, chasing after them while Nyanias and Crouton try to make their escape. However, the wolves turn and give chase instead, and soon the group notices that the goons from earlier are lurking nearby, and even someone among them appears to be controlling the wolves. Just then, the bobcat's keen sense picks up their scent, and she rounds up everyone from their hiding spot. Kenichi then spots a dropped flute one that belongs to the dogman and realizes that this creature is the one controlling the black wolves. So Kenichi urgently orders Nyanias and Crouton to get out while they still can, and they promptly make their escape. The dogman then scrambles to retrieve his flute, trying to command the black wolves to pursue his targets. But Kenichi is convinced that the wolves won't be able to outrun a catman. Yet the wolves seem immune to the dogman's orders, their instincts alerting them to something ominous nearby. Suddenly, a massive shadowy beast emerges from the gloom and swiftly takes down the dogman. The goons scatter in terror, but Kenichi, ever the fool, sticks around to watch the carnage unfold. As the beast draws closer, Kenichi fires his crossbow at it. At that very moment, the bobcat leaps onto the beast to distract it, while Kenichi unleashes a barrage of firecrackers 10 times his usual amount. The brainless beast surprisingly catches the fireworks in its gaping maw, and the explosions detonate inside, visibly weakening it. Not one to be outdone, Kenichi then summons his backhoe and charges at the beast from behind, delivering a crushing blow to its head that brings it down. Surveying the scene, he notices the dogman lying unconscious, and the scene then fades as Kenichi heads back to Crouton's house. Kenichi inquires about Mary and soon learns that the worst is over, and Crouton and his wife gratefully thank him for saving their daughter. Though Kenichi insists he's not one to go around playing the hero, he admits that it was a welcome change of pace. Later, he pulls Crouton aside outside the house and confides that earlier he had saved the dogman, extracting a promise from him never to harm Crouton or his family. The dogman agreed, though he warned that he couldn't control others who might bear a grudge against Crouton. Sensing the danger, Kenichi advises Crouton to relocate his family so they'll no longer be at risk. Crouton laments that he has nowhere else to go, and he even can't move to Dahlia either because Zudera is linked to Bacopa. Sensing a solution, Kenichi mentions he has a lead, Paul's domain, which was formed recently. He even offers to write a letter of recommendation, given his friendship with the Baron, and though Crouton is thrilled at the prospect, he asks for time to consider the decision. Kenichi understands that abandoning one's homeland requires a certain resolve. The next day, when Kenichi returns home, Miley is furious that she wasn't included in such a fun adventure. Kenichi explains that he simply didn't have the time to bring her along, and he also needed someone to watch over Anemone. Miley eventually accepts his explanation, and Anemone expresses heartfelt gratitude for Mary's rescue. A few days later, Crouton and Nyanias depart the city, heading towards Paul's barony, while Crouton's wife and daughters remain behind because Mary is still unwell, and they plan to join him at the barony later. Later, Miley's sensitive nose picks up the scent of a dogman lurking near their house, the same one from earlier. He remarks that it's a relief that Crouton has left, recalling how he'd warned them that many still harbored grudges against Crouton, but now they needn't worry since he has taken care of those troublemakers. Although Miley remains distrustful of anything a dogman might say, but the dogman insists that his loyalty is not to be taken lightly before taking his leave. When Kenichi asks if he's off somewhere, the dogman reveals that he can no longer live in this city. Later, we see Kenichi at the guild where he has arranged for the beast from earlier to be butchered. The local butcher is astonished to see him arriving with a tusk bear in tow and asks how the hell you managed to take down something so enormous, which Kenichi says that it's just mere luck. Kenichi then instructs the local butcher to have the meat and the embedded magic stone scooped out because he will sell off the remaining part. The butcher sets to work immediately, though he warns that it will take until evening to complete the task. With nothing else to do, Kenichi decides to head home for a short break. As he passes by a particular hotel, a sudden chill runs down his spine, so he wonders if someone might be discussing him. Inside the hotel, a familiar face can be seen searching for someone, adding to his unease. Later back at his house, Kenichi fires up his magical contraption to produce biodiesel. He accomplishes this effortlessly and marvels that his production cost has dropped by a factor of 10. Testing the new oil in his generator, he's pleased to see that it runs smoothly. That evening, Kenichi decides to return to the city, informing Miley and Anemone that he'll spend the night there if it gets too late. He makes a beeline for the old lady's shop, where the proprietor informs him that the registration for the grimoire is complete and hands it over. Kenichi notices that the grimoire has a magic stone embedded in its cover. The old lady explains that this stone is integral. The incantation recorded within the book is linked to it, and without the stone, the spell will never activate. Understanding its importance, Kenichi hopes that this purchase will be as valuable as the magical tool he acquired earlier. The scene then shifts to Kenichi collecting the processed meat and the magic stone from the tusk bear. At the counter, the butcher informs him that he may now collect his payment for the materials sold. As the receptionist hands him the money, Kenichi shamelessly glances at her massive melon, an action that clearly makes her uncomfortable. Next, we see him on his way back home when he suddenly gets another chill, thinking he should hurry back before catching a damn cold. But then out of nowhere someone grabs his sleeve and tells him that she finally caught him. Looking back, he finds Primula and asks her what the hell she is doing here. She wraps him in a tight hug and scolds him for vanishing so abruptly. So he says that if he hadn't, disappearance might have jeopardized her company if the nobles had captured him, but she shrugs, saying it's up to them whether it's a problem or not. Noticing the growing scene, Kenichi tells her they need to talk somewhere more private. Primula insists he follows her to her hotel, and the scene shifts to them chatting quietly in the hotel cafeteria. She recounts how the Dre sign he once showed them ended up earning her family their name, and she goes on about all the other ways he's helped her and her family. Kenichi, however, downplays his own role, insisting that her family was a big help to him. She then reminds him that he even rescued her from bandits, and he pleads with her to calm down, reminding her that he'd heard rumors she was about to marry Paul. Primula laughs it off, admitting that while there was talk of it, she ultimately turned him down. Kenichi admits he thought such a union might have been perfect, but before the conversation can go further, Primula changes the subject. She mentions that both Anama and the old mage were upset with him for disappearing without a proper goodbye. He confesses that he did feel guilty about leaving abruptly, but he never wanted to cause trouble. Yet, she insists he wasn't causing any trouble at all. Accepting this, he suggests that she should head home now that she's reassured him, but Primula stubbornly refuses to leave without him. But Kenichi has no plans of returning soon, so she decides to stick around with him. Kenichi then asks how she managed to figure out he was in this city. Primula explains that she's been diligently checking with the guild to see if he registered in any other city, and one day she discovered that he had indeed enrolled in the local guild in this city. So without wasting a moment, she hopped into a carriage and rushed here. Finally, she boldly asks him to make a woman out of her tonight, a request that leaves him uncertain, but she insists, so Kenichi knows better than to refuse a hot lady's insistence. and he finally agrees. The scene then shifts to Primula's room, where Primula wastes no time disrobing, and soon enough she and Kenichi share a very intimate moment. The next day, when Kenichi returns to his mansion, Miley and Anemone are taken aback to see him accompanied by a woman only to realize that it's Mallow's daughter. Primula is visibly upset that Kenichi left her behind, but he brought both Anemone and Miley along. Kenichi says that he didn't plan to bring Miley. She simply followed his scent, and he couldn't leave Anemone alone since she's just a child. Clearly, Anemone isn't happy seeing Kenichi and Primula grow closer, and soon both she and Miley start vying for his attention. Anemone then blurts out a question, asking Kenichi if she's going to stay with them from now on, worried that it will make their house feel too cramped. This sparks a rivalry between her and Primula. Kenichi urges them to get along, and although Anemone hopes he won't bring more people into the mix, he hesitantly agrees. Then Primula notices Vel, and is surprised to see that Kenichi brought the bobcat along, even though she expected him to bring her instead. Kenichi explains that Vel followed him too. Later, everyone argues over who gets to sleep closest to Kenichi, and he eventually puts the squabble aside to take a bath, remarking that he even bought an extra tub now that their little family has grown. We then see Kenichi bathing in one tub, while Miley and Anemone share another. However, Anemone insists on joining Kenichi in his tub. Though he's unsure at first, he can't really stop her, and they end up bathing together. Primula eventually comes to join them as well, but she feels too shy about sharing the bath with everyone. Kenichi tells her she can have a private bath later, but she becomes frightened of bathing alone at night and opts to join Miley instead. After their bath, Kenichi attempts to cast the fireball spell from the grimoire he acquired, only to have it fizzle out. Disappointed and thinking he has no power, he's about to give up when suddenly Anemone just for fun recites the spell, and to everyone's astonishment, a fireball erupts right in the middle of the house, leaving everyone utterly astonished. Without delay, Kenichi snaps up a fire extinguisher, and alongside the girls they quickly douses the sudden blaze. Anemone apologizes for the disruption, but instead of getting mad, Kenichi is delighted and impressed that she managed to use her magic so effectively. But the excitement is short-lived as Anemone suddenly collapses, so they immediately take her to bed, and by morning her fever has eased. Kenichi then offers her a can of peaches, which she devours with joy, and the other two girls are equally fascinated, remarking that the peaches taste like a fruit proper for royalty. A few days later, once Anemone has fully recovered, Kenichi invites Mary and her mom over. Since Mary too has gotten better, they gather for a lively barbecue featuring tusk bear meat, but Mary complains that the meat is too tough and difficult to chew. Agreeing with her, Kenichi tenderizes the meat using soy sauce and a blend of spices before barbecuing it again. This time, the meat turns out delicious, and everyone enjoys the meal. After dinner, Kenichi prepares a hearty soup using the leftover bear stew, leaving everyone amazed by how good it tastes. Later, we see that Anemone and Mary have finished the picture book they were working on, and Primula exclaims that it has great potential for sales. She decides to start a business in Astrantia based on their creative project, prompting Kenichi to jokes that he might have just ignited her mercantile spirit ass when he asks her what else she plans to sell besides the picture book. She explains that she intends to market the bear stew and a dish called stewed rinkus. Mary's mom chimes in, confident that these products will sell. After all, she's never tasted anything as delectable even in Astrantia. The others share her enthusiasm, and Mary's mom even offers to help Kenichi's wife sell the goods, as a way to repay him for everything he's done for their family. Primula beams at being affectionately dubbed Kenichi's wife, and Mary's mom, drawing on her experience as a waitress, promises to be a tremendous help. Kenichi agrees to the arrangement, and Mary also decides to pitch in. When she asks Anemone what her plans are, Anemone simply declares that she wants to stay with him. The next day, Kenichi drops Primula off in town and buys her a utility cart, sending her off to conduct business. Later in town, Primula and the girls are seen selling their stew, which quickly becomes a hot item. A crowd gathers to sample it, with many insisting that it's sophisticated enough to be served to nobles. However, the atmosphere sours when a group of rough-looking men suddenly appears and begins to stir up trouble. They loudly claim that a bug was found in the stew, launching a frenzied outcry about poor hygiene in their stall. The scene then shifts to Kenichi Kenichi using his drone to survey the cliff near his house, and he is amazed to discover that the plateau above is teeming with untouched resources. Convinced that there's a treasure trove of materials waiting to be harvested, he listens as Anemone, peering through her binoculars, spots some sparkly stones on the cliff's edge. Curious, Kenichi takes a closer look and realizes he's never seen an ore like this before, so he's got a feeling they'll fetch a hefty price. Wondering how to mine them, he glances at the time and notes that it's already evening. Deciding to seize the opportunity, he heads back to town to pick up Primula. There, he meets Primula and the others, and she excitedly informs him that they've sold out today. Kenichi is surprised by her success on her very first day, but he figures it must be thanks to his good food combined with her sharp business sense. Then he asks who the beast woman with her is, and Primula explains that she saved them when some troublemakers were causing a ruckus at the store. Apparently, she told those men that she'd seen them tamper with the stew by adding a bug, and when they refused to admit it, she pointed out that they likely still had bugs in their pockets as proof. The ruffians were so taken aback by her knowledge that they left, realizing they couldn't win the argument. Primula then mentions that she's hired the beast woman as a bodyguard. Kenichi thanks her for helping out, but the beast woman, with a cheeky grin, says the incident actually worked in her favor because Primula had rewarded her with a small silver coin just for giving a stern glare at the troublemakers. She considers the job an easy one and introduces herself as Naima, and Kenichi introduces himself in turn. Kenichi then heads back home, and there, Miley and Anemone welcome him warmly, but they're surprised to see that he's brought another woman along. Kenichi explains that she's Primula's new bodyguard, so Miley is relieved to learn she isn't yet another one of his conquests. And Kenichi adds that Naimna is only there because Primula wanted to treat her to dinner. The bobcat then greets Kenichi at the door, and Naimna becomes shocked at the sight of a bobcat. Later that evening, Naimna sits down to dinner and gushes that the meal is fantastic, but she laments that it would be even better with a glass of wine. Kenichi obliges by handing her some, though he sheepishly admits it's the cheapest wine he could find in the store. Naimna marvels, declaring the place feels like paradise with such scrumptious food and wine. Not long after, Kenichi casually asks if she'd like to take a bath. Surprised and delighted that they even have one, Naimna nods, while Anemone volunteers to heat up the water using her fire magic. Kenichi watches with a trace of worry, wondering if it's safe for her to cast fire magic in rapid succession. But Primula reassures him that every use of magic only strengthens their abilities. Eventually, everyone settles into a long, relaxing soak in the tub, and later they dry off, feeling refreshed. Afterwards, Naimna admires the beds, confessing that she could live here forever, but Miley quickly objects, pointing out that the house is already cramped with the four of them. Later, Kenichi begins Anemone's classes. Much to Naimna's surprise at seeing her study, Kenichi explains that learning to read, write, and do arithmetic will broaden her future opportunities. He adds that he's heard women have few options in this world, a fact that Naimna grimly acknowledges, noting that many are forced to sell themselves to survive. Kenichi then suggests that Anemone work with Primula to learn the ropes of business, but Anemone is adamant about pursuing magic and one day slaying dragons with him instead. Kenichi, however, is not keen on grand adventures. He'd much prefer to lead a slow, peaceful life. In the meantime, Primula's stall continues to flourish each day, and Kenichi manages to build a scaffolding to scale the cliff. When he finishes, he notices it's already late. Primula returns from work and asks him if he's just storing all that junk in his item box. He admits he does have many secrets locked away, but he can't reveal everything. And he adds that everyone has a few secrets, and he's sure she has one or two of her own. Suspicious yet intrigued, she watches as he plants a kiss on her, whispering that now is the time to leave if she wishes, but she refuses to leave him. Naimna is watching the hot scene, hoping they won't engage in such antics in her presence, as it frustrates her. Kenichi then jokingly asks if she doesn't have a man, remarking on how charming she is, but she coolly replies that she prefers to steer clear of useless men. The next day, Kenichi is busy cutting grass around the scaffolding, while Primula takes the day off to explore the other side. Once they all climb up, Kenichi reveals that he's also invited Mary and her mom to join the outing. They then disperse to pursue various interests, and Kenichi starts drilling into the wall of the cliff. He extracts an ore, examines it, and discovers it's called rhodonite, and a single piece is worth more than 200,000 50,000 yen. Excited at the prospect of striking it rich, he mines several more, eventually accumulating a total value of about 1 million yen. Later that evening, Kenichi turns his attention to dinner, preparing gyoza with the help of the girls. When the meal is finished, they all sit down to taste it, marveling at how delicious it is, especially considering it's made from bear meat. Primula is particularly impressed by the tangy yellow sauce, which Kenichi explains is called mayonnaise, a condiment that, according to Naima, has recently become very popular in the empire. She adds that it was even created by a mage using magic, a comment that reminds Kenichi of the ingenious innovator behind double-entry bookkeeping and the pitcher pump. As they continue dining, Kenichi wonders if the mage is also eating gyoza, and then Primula asks if he used magic to make the gyoza, but he insists that his secret lies in a simple recipe: vinegar, eggs, and some oil. Surprised by this down-to-earth method, Primula begs him to teach her the recipe, and he promises to do so later. Soon, as they resume eating, Primula mentions that she'd love to sell the gyoza at her stall. Kenichi reminds her that it's a labor-intensive process, to which she retorts that she can always hire extra staff. Kenichi smiles, acknowledging that she truly is a full-fledged merchant. Not ready to call it a night yet, Kenichi decides to prepare another dish. This time he cooks a steak, and Naimna thinks that it's so delicious. But then her keen nose picks up a distinct aroma, and Kenichi reveals that it's wine. She eagerly requests a taste, and Kenichi warns her that the wine is potent, but he can't resist her pleading, so he pours her a generous gulp, and before long, she becomes completely drunk and clings to him. Miley, disapproving of the display, drags her away, but Naimna assures Miley she has no intention of stealing Kenichi away, and she even asks if she can stay with everyone. Miley, however, sternly refuses, ordering her to leave immediately. Kenichi intervenes, reminding Miley to behave, as Primula still needs her as a bodyguard. Although Miley remains wary of Naimna, Primula trusts her and ultimately agrees to let her stay, knowing well that Naimna's interest lies solely in the food and not in Kenichi himself. Later, we see that Naimna has set up her own room in the shed. She casually asks Kenichi if she needs to pay rent, to which he replies that she doesn't. Teasingly, she asks if he's trying to tame her, but Kenichi laughs it off, saying he isn't and he just wants her to keep helping out Primula. As he moves to leave, Naimna leans in and playfully asks if he's not going to do anything to her after spending a room alone with her. Just then Miley steps in, diffusing the tension before anything perv happens. Both Naima and Miley tell Kenichi that he's free to do as he pleases with them, leaving him momentarily bewildered about what the hell to do next. A month later, Primula's stall has expanded so much that it's now known as Corolla. She's hired new staff, one of whom is named Iris, who is training to become the chef for a new branch she plans to open. As more time passes, Kenichi reveals that he's managed to mine rhodonite worth 15 million yen. He also mentions that Anemone has started gathering herbs atop the plateau, while Miley and Naimna have turned the area into their personal hunting grounds. Soon after, it's announced that Corolla has rented a warehouse in the city, and they've begun preparing their products there. Daily profits range from 150,000 to 200,000 yen, with an estimated annual profit exceeding 70 million yen. With enough staff on board to open 2 new branches, Iris has even taken on the role of trainer for the other chefs. Kenichi marvels at this success, remarking that this is the true power of a top-class merchant and that Primula is operating on an entirely different level than he is. That night, as the group winds down, Primula thanks Kenichi, saying that all her success is thanks to his delicious food. Kenichi reflects that the power of his old world is not something to be trifled with, and he silently hopes that this prosperous trend will continue, though he knows that change is inevitable. Elsewhere, the Queen is in conversation with Princess Lilith. The Queen informs Lilith that the bandits near Dahlia have been defeated, apparently by a mage capable of summoning iron beasts. Lilith comments that such a feat must be a heavy blow to the royalist faction, and she wonders aloud who could have possibly summoned those iron beasts. The Queen then reveals that the mage in question has taken up residence in Astrantia, an unexpected twist of fate that intrigues Lilith. The Queen states that the spirits must have guided him there, hinting that something significant is about to unfold in that region. That concludes this episode. Thank you for watching. If you want to see the next part, be sure to subscribe to the channel and turn on the notification bell.